Are we witnessing the beginning of World War III? How about an update on the Third Temple, the world government, lawsuits over President Biden's climate executive order, and much more in the news today? And we'll analyze the prophetic significance of these events on today's edition of End of the Age. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dave Robbins with Endtime Ministries. Thank you for joining me on this edition of End of the Age. I'm going to start off with a very ominous prophecy, the Sixth Trumpet War, or the World War III. It's found in Revelation 9, 13 through 16. The Bible says, "Then the sixth angel sounded, and I heard a voice from the four horns of the golden altar which is before God, saying to the sixth angel who had the trumpet, release the four angels which are bound in the great river Euphrates. So the four angels who had been prepared for an hour, a day, a month, and a year were released to kill a third of all of mankind. And now the number of the army of the horsemen was 200 million, and I heard the number of them." So, number one, we know that this starts in the Euphrates River region, which flows from Turkey, Syria, Iraq, and down into the Persian Gulf, just in the final border between Iraq and Iran. And then it's going, number two, that it will kill 1/3 of the entire human race. I don't like to talk about this prophecy because it's just horribly ominous. Number three, there's going to be a 200 million man army involved in this war. So you might be asking, well, Dave, why do you talk about this so often? Well, because the first 5 trumpets have already occurred. This is the sixth trumpet. It's one of the next things to be fulfilled on God's prophetic timeline. Now, I know, because I've been down this road a million times, that many folks teach the church will be gone when this event occurs, or that the 7 seals, 7 trumpets, and 7 vials all occur during the final 7 years, which is quote unquote the Great Tribulation, right? However, there is a few misconceptions with this thinking that leads to this assumption. Other prophecies foretell the first seal, which is the spirit of Catholicism in the earth, that began all the way back. The seal was opened and began all the way back around 325 AD. And we also know from Bible prophecy that the first trumpet, World War I, occurred between 1914 and 1918. So the prophecy of the seals and trumpets began in some cases well over 1,000 years ago. Well, of course, the Bible also teaches the rapture will not occur until immediately after the Great Tribulation, which of course has not even started yet. So, God's prophetic timeline from the Old Testament prophets of Daniel, Ezekiel, Zechariah, Isaiah, and others, all the way to Revelation chapter 22, reveals that the Sixth Trumpet War, or World War III, and the Israeli-Palestinian peace agreement, if you map out all the events that will happen in order, that the Sixth Trumpet War and the Israeli peace agreement are the next 2 events to be fulfilled on God's prophetic timeline. We do not know which one scripturally happens first. But I always go back to, and I'm going to give you an update on what's going on in the Middle East, a very detailed update, because there's a lot of conflict going on. But I always go back to that World War III has already begun article by a gentleman named Abramowitz, because it's very key that you understand how far we are into this conflict. he states that World War III, the conflict we now unfortunately find ourselves in his opinion, is far more complex and confusing than World War II. A good example is America's principal enemy, Iran, supported by, always remember this, because remember there's going to be an army of 200 million soldiers that participates in World War III, right? Well, Iran, supported by Russia, China, which can field an army of 200 million soldiers, and the European Union, which declared war on America 40 years ago, and continuously preaches genocide against the United States, death to America or Big Satan, and Israel, death to Israel or Little Satan. So numerous U.S. federal courts have ruled that Iran's leaders provided material support to Al-Qaeda for the purposes of carrying out the 9/11 attacks. And they imposed judgments on tens of billions of dollars on them and ordered U.S.-based properties owned by the Islamic Republic to be seized and auctioned off to pay off these and other judgments. So as the aggressor, Iran relatively successfully, again, and I've stated this many times, but it's so critical, they use 6 forms of modern warfare. Physical, you're seeing that happening in the news right now. Cultural, economic, legal, demographic, and cyber warfare. And it's created 3 worldwide terror arms specializing in physical terrorism, narco-terrorism, cultural terrorism, with an estimated 450,000 terrorist operatives in over 30 countries. Now, what other entity is doing that? Iran is the leading state sponsor of terrorism on the planet. It's not going to go away like a Syrian civil war or an ISIS or something like that. So Iran's goal is to take over the world and to convert everyone to Islam, particularly its Shiite version, using all forms of warfare. America's goal, in contrast to that, is to live in peace and prosperity, while encouraging all democracies, about 50% of the global population, and dictatorships, pretty much the other 50%, to join in worldwide economic growth. So there's really no compatibility between these two national objectives. Either one or the other can prevail, but not both. And according to Abramowitz, therefore we find ourselves in a World War III, even though we don't want to be, you don't think that we are, and don't even want to consider the possibility that we might be. But let's look at what's going on in the Middle East region, knowing that the Sixth Trumpet War it's highly likely that that's the next big prophetic fulfillment on God's prophetic timeline. Let's look at what's going on in the Middle East right now, because it's really boiling. And there will be something at some point that sets this thing off. There's going to be a spark that's thrown into that tinderbox that ignites a World War III out of this. The Bible tells us it's coming. And it's coming right out of the most volatile region on the planet. And so we're coming up to a break. When we get back from the break, I'm going to give you a very detailed update of what's been happening over the last 2 or 3 weeks that could very quickly lead us into a World War III scenario. We're speculating.
Major internet companies are silencing and censoring Christian voices online. These companies are trying to control what you see and hear. Almost 200 videos of ours have been marked as restricted online right now. That's why we launched End of the Age Plus, a platform where the truth won't be censored, a platform where we can preach the message of the gospel. When you subscribe to End of the Age Plus today for just $12.99 a month, you can watch all of our content in a secure, easy-to-view way from your favorite device. When you go to watch.endtime.com and subscribe, you'll get instant access to all of our teaching resources, including Revelation, the Unveiling of Jesus Christ, Understanding the End Time, End Time Magazine, and so much more. We will not censor our message to comply with what the world deems as politically correct. Go to watch.endtime.com right now or search End of the Age Plus in the App Store or Google Play.
We've seen Bible prophecy fulfilled like never before. From the halls of the United Nations to the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, Endtime Ministries continues to reveal the Bible prophecy in the news headlines around the world every day. Whether it's through our broadcast or online at our Jerusalem Prophecy College, your gifts enable us to put vital materials in the hands of those who need it most. Because of you, we continue to replace fear with faith in the hearts of Christians around the world. We will continue to see prophecy come to pass at an even swifter pace. We need your support. Your donation of any amount enables us to continue to broadcast and be a voice in the ever-growing censored media. To become a partner or give a one-time gift, visit endtime.com or call 1-800-END-TIME right now. That's 800-363-8463. Go online now. Visit endtime.com.
Now, I'm going to be giving you a very detailed Middle East conflict scenario. What's going on right now in this region that the Bible says the World War III or the Sixth Trumpet War will emanate from. Just before I do that, I've got to announce a prophecy conference that I'm going to be doing this weekend in Madison, Mississippi. We always have a huge conference down there, and we want to have a huge one this weekend. I got a great lesson for you. We'll be at the Parkway Pentecostal Church, 601 Reunion Parkway. That's Madison, Mississippi. Saturday at this coming Saturday at 6 p.m. I'll be teaching the future according to Bible prophecy and revealing the timeline that I made. And then Sunday morning at 10:45, I'll be teaching an updated Breaking Prophetic Fulfillment. So really like to have you join us in Madison, Mississippi this weekend. All the information's online under events and then conferences. And it's got all the phone numbers, everything you need to join us in Madison, Mississippi this weekend. Look forward to seeing you there. Okay, the Sixth Trumpet War scenario. This is right in the region the Bible says that this war will emanate from. I know there's been many conflicts over the last several decades there, but it's really heating up, and the Bible says there's going to come a time when this war will ignite, if it hasn't already ignited. The Debka file reports that Iran piles on aggression, emboldened by the U.S. Saudi-Israel restraint. So, the United States' goodwill gestures and warning signals have clearly lost their punch for Iran. Even when backed by the mighty U.S. B-52 bombers that have been flying over their heads over the last couple months, after dozens of attacks on Saudi Arabia in recent weeks, Iran-backed Yemeni Houthi rebels outdid themselves just a couple of days ago by sending 14 armed drones and 8 ballistic missiles flying towards Saudi patrol tank farm in Ras Tanura, one of the largest oil shipping ports in the world. Okay, so they're really becoming emboldened, and they're also wanting a nuclear weapon. So imagine that. The largest state sponsor of terrorism getting a nuclear weapon. Israel and the United States are never going to let that happen, obviously. At least I hope the United States wouldn't under the President Biden administration. And the residential area of Dhahran that houses foreign oil workers, including Americans. So on the same day, 2 heavy nuclear-capable U.S. B-52 Stratus Fortress bombers made a round trip to the Gulf and back to the home base, and they were escorted through the skies of that region by British, Israel, Saudi, and Qatari warplanes. And it was the heavy bombers' 7th mission over the Gulf and the 2nd one under the Joe Biden administration since he took office as president. So in sharp contrast to actions that were set in motion from Iran, America's answer to the Yemeni attack on Saudi Arabia scarcely even resonated. But Iran's Yemeni proxy was clearly on the march even after the Biden administration made the gesture of lifting the terror designation and halting arms sales to Saudi Arabia. So the template for America's non-response to devastating Iranian-instigated attacks on Saudi Arabia was set all the way back in September of 2019 when the Saudis' main oil field, you remember it was in the news, their main oil field of Abu Ghraib and Kuris were hit squarely and precisely by the same mix of drones and ballistic missiles. So the attack, which cut the Saudi oil production in half, was launched jointly by these Yemeni Houthis, supported by Iran in the south, and they are pro-Iranian Iraqi Shiite militias from the north, both the Yemeni Houthis and these militias. So not content that with instigating a major assault on Saudi Arabia, Iranian officials also just Sunday had strong words for Israel too. And Defense Minister Amir Hatami, he threatened to annihilate Tel Aviv and Haifa and to wipe them out if Israel conducted a preemptive attack on Iran, which Israel's saying it will do if they continue with their nuclear aspirations. So since this threat has become a constant, Hatami reinforced it by saying that this time, because they've said it over many times over the years, he said, this time I've got orders from the Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, to translate those words into active operations. Well, obviously that would be a not so smart thing for Iran because Israel's sitting on about 200 nuclear weapons. So that's not real smart. But Tehran has a proxy nearby, a terrorist proxy, the Lebanese Hezbollah, for carrying out its threat to hit Israel's north port of Haifa and its population and key strategic infrastructure. But to seriously damage Tel Aviv, Tehran would have to do its own work with ballistic missiles, and that has not happened before. But the threat should be taken seriously after Iran felt confident enough to destroy that important Saudi infrastructure without fear of American reprisal. So they're really getting emboldened right now. And remember, their allies are Russia, China, and the European Union. So another significant event on just Sunday, a couple days ago, was confirmation that Iran's Revolutionary Guards are keeping up an uninterpreted campaign in terror against Israeli and Jewish targets worldwide. More than a month after a crude bomb exploded outside the Israeli embassy in January, and India's counterterrorism agencies attributed the plot to the Iranian Al-Quds force. So it's not just in the Middle East. That's the main thing going on. But remember, I said they've got proxies in over 30 nations, about 500,000 terrorist proxies. So this ties in also with the Iranian attack on the Israeli cargo ship, the MV Helios Ray, in the Gulf of Oman back on, February 26th. So this escalating run of Iranian aggression has been ongoing for weeks without a comeback from the U.S., Israel, or Saudi Arabia. Even Israel's systematic aerial campaign against Iran's military presence in Syria is running out of effective steam. So the Iranians seem to feel that although their enemies loudly threaten to prevent their acquisition of a nuclear bomb, that they're not going to do anything about it. And so Iran has time, meanwhile, to safely advance on its quest for a nuke. The nuclear watchdog reported that on yesterday that Iran has started enriching uranium with a third cascade of advanced IR-2M centrifuges at its underground plant at Natanz, and further breaching Iran's 2015 deal with the major powers, obviously that President Trump pulled us out of, that President Biden is wanting to enter the United States back into, not by a treaty to where it's got to go before the Senate, but just as an agreement between governments. So the fourth cascade of 174 IR-2M centrifuges of Iran's nuclear aspirations was installed but not yet fed with uranium, and installation of the fifth was ongoing. So this is not going away. They've wanted nuclear weapons for years. And imagine again the largest state sponsor of terrorism on the planet getting a nuclear weapon. Well, then let me get a little bit more detailed than that, even in the Middle East region. Because of this Sixth Trumpet War, World War III prophecy that's just looming. Zero Hedge, and many news, I chose Zero Hedge out of a ton of them. They are publishing articles that say 9 signs that pieces are being moved into place for a major Middle East war. So what's happening? Well, the American people, they're really going to be regretting putting the warmongers back in control. Now, this is the writer. I'm going to give you some excerpts from the article. Joe Biden has been in the White House for less than 2 months. And the warmongers that President Biden has surrounded himself with have been feverishly setting the stage for the next war in the Middle East. While President Trump was in the White House for 4 years, the U.S. didn't start any new conflicts. But now the Biden administration is quite determined to start projecting American influence all over the globe once again. Most Americans don't understand the big picture, but the truth is that this is going to have a very serious implications over the next few years if it continues on like it is. So let's examine some of these chess moves, let's say, that have been made since President Biden entered the White House. And as you're going to see, it's a very troubling picture that's emerging once you start putting all these pieces together. So, number one, literally one day after President Biden was inaugurated, there was a massive U.S. military convoy that rolled into northeastern Syria, and this was reported by the Syrian state news agency, SANA, and they were citing sources on the ground. And according to the report, the convoy included some 40 trucks and armored vehicles and was backed by the air by helicopters. And President Trump had tried very hard to disengage from the war in Syria, but President Biden has made it crystal clear that the U.S. will be heavily involved in that conflict moving forward. Number two, just a few weeks later, President Biden conducted his first airstrike against Iranian-backed forces in Syria. And the Pentagon said that the strike destroyed multiple facilities and was ordered in response to the attack against the U.S. and coalition personnel in Iraq. Militia officials said that one person had been killed, but a war monitor reported at least 22 fatalities. Number three, of course it was inevitable that Iranian-backed forces would respond, and they retaliated by launching rockets at a military base in Iraq where United States forces were stationed. And just a couple days ago, new Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said that there will be a U.S. military response at a time and place of our own choosing. So it's ramping back up right here in this region where the Bible says that's where World War III is going to start. Number four, more U.S. airstrikes may come sooner rather than later. In fact, it is being reported that the U.S. has just sent 6 B-52 bombers to Diego Garcia. And that we were citing a U.S. official, this was CNN on Monday, reported that the Cold War-era bomber will be available for operations against Iran if ordered. So, number five, the Biden administration is also sending approximately 10,000 more troops to the Middle East. President Trump was trying to pull them out. President Biden says, nah, you guys are going back. Once the amphibious assault ship Baton, which is moving towards the Middle East, arrives, the U.S. will have added roughly 10,000 personnel to that area within the last week. And that's according to the Wall Street Journal. Number six, Syrian opposition groups at least one war monitor blamed Russia for the strike Friday near the towns of Jarablus and Al-Bab near the border up on with Turkey. In a report, the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, based in Britain, said that Russian warships in the Mediterranean had fired 3 missiles that struck primitive oil refineries and tanker trucks in the region. So now you got Russia involved there as well. So you got United States forces going back, Russia's involved in Syria as well. Iran's involved in Syria, Hezbollah, all these different things. Right here in this region, it's always just simmering, simmering, simmering. But the Bible says there's going to be a time when it boils over. Number 7, meanwhile, Israel continues to hit strategically important targets inside Syria on a regular basis. And there's a report coming from a news source that was published in late February, and they reported that, and they said that Syrian air defenses were activated in the capital of Damascus and its southern suburbs Sunday night to repel an Israeli missile attack, the state media reported, but there was no word on the casualties. And then number 8, Israel is particularly interested in keeping Iran from developing nuclear weapons. That's the biggest story to me. In an interview with Fox News, Israeli Defense Minister Benny Gantz, who's sharing the government with Prime Minister Netanyahu, just stated that Israel is ready to attack Iran without any help from the U.S. They've done it before, they're willing to do it again, and Israel has identified numerous targets inside Iran that would hurt its ability to develop a nuclear bomb. They said if the world stops them before, if the world stops Iran before, then hey, that would be very good. But if not, Israel is willing to stand independently and that they must defend themselves by themselves if they have to. That's what Gantz said in an interview with an American outlet. And then finally, number 9, during a phone call last Thursday between Kamala Harris and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, made it exceedingly clear that his nation, Israel, is ready to do whatever it takes to prevent the Iranians from developing their own nukes. Prime Minister Netanyahu said that he would continue to strengthen their intelligence, security, cooperation, and said that during their conversation as Prime Minister of Israel, he was totally committed to preventing Iran from developing a nuclear weapon.
Move Mountains with Irvin Baxter. This book by Irvin's grandson provides 30 days of devotion that will enhance your relationship with God and others. Authentic illustrations from early morning devotions at Endtime will help you find your purpose and eliminate fears. Commit to taking this 30-day journey and experience real life change. Get your book for only $14.99. Call 1-800-363-8463 or go to endtime.com/move.
Major internet companies are silencing and censoring Christian voices online. These companies are trying to control what you see and hear. Almost 200 videos of ours have been marked as restricted online right now. That's why we launched End of the Age Plus, a platform where the truth won't be censored, a platform where we can preach the message of the gospel. When you subscribe to End of the Age Plus today for just $12.99 a month, you can watch all of our content in a secure, easy-to-view way from your favorite device. When you go to watch.endtime.com and subscribe, you'll get instant access to all of our teaching resources, including Revelation, the Unveiling of Jesus Christ, Understanding the End Time, End Time Magazine, and so much more. We will not censor our message to comply with what the world deems as politically correct. Go to watch.endtime.com right now or search End of the Age Plus in the App Store or Google Play.
If your station only carries the first 30 minutes of End of the Age, go to endtime.com and click the Watch button to continue today's broadcast. You can also finish up later by clicking the Archive button.
So there you have it, the Sixth Trumpet War, World War III, and update. What's going on in the Middle East? Well, there's a lot going on in the Middle East, and we need to talk about it. I know I talk about it a lot, and people wonder, why do you guys talk about the Sixth Trumpet War so much, World War III? That's not going to happen till the final 7 years. The church is going to be gone. Well, no, you've got to understand the church will be here during that, because the church is not raptured until the end of the Great Tribulation. That's why it's so important that we understand the timelines and all these different things and when things happen and so we can get our perspective right. You say, well, I don't want to be here during World War III. I don't either. But I didn't write the prophecies. Those things are set in stone and they're going to happen. All we can do is ask God for the interpretation of the prophecies, let Him lead us and guide us, study the Bible, and then that's what we've got to go with. And so I have to talk about it. Even though it's a very ominous prophecy, there's a lot of prophecies I don't enjoy talking about, because when you talk about people being killed and things like that, you know, it's not exactly a joyous thing to talk about. I mean, let's just be honest. But we've got to talk about it because it's coming up in the very near future. And one of the things I would say is, because I know I've got people all over the world listening. You say, well, how do we prepare for something like that? Yes, there are ways that you could prepare for any kind of a calamity. I'm not talking about going off into full-on prepper mode and things like that, because the church we've got a job in the end time, and that's to reach this world with the gospel of the kingdom of Jesus Christ. However, there are some things, I mean, like, think about it when any kind of a catastrophe happens. Just a few weeks ago, we had this huge polar vortex come up through Texas, and the grocery stores were empty of a lot of things. Well, imagine if you would have had some food stored up. So imagine that's just a winter storm or a COVID situation when the grocery stores would get emptied out, people flipping out. Well, imagine when a World War III scenario hits. And so you got to think about that type of stuff coming up so you can kind of be prepared. And, you know, perhaps I'll do a program on that coming up in the future, things you could do to be prepared for a World War III scenario. I've had people give me information over the years. And if you have any information, you say, well, nobody's going to live through a nuclear bomb. Well, yeah, if you're in ground zero, I mean, let's just face it, you'll be meeting your maker. But there were people in Hiroshima and Nagasaki that survived. You understand? And there have been books written by people who were in the cities. There was a book written by one guy who was in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. He was there when the first bomb was dropped, and he drove home to where his family was, and then they dropped a bomb there, and he had lived through both bombs. There's a book written by a guy. And so you may not be at ground zero, but you might be just outside of the area where the bomb hits. You survive. What can you do? There's things you can do that can greatly increase your chances of survival, if you do them within the first 24 to 48 hours. So very, very important. We'll talk about that on an upcoming program. I'll put a program together about that. But we have to talk about what's going on because of the first 5 trumpets have already occurred. This is the 6th trumpet. The prophecy is given 2,000 years ago. And the first 5 trumpets have happened within just over the last 100 years. So they're just clipping off one right after another. Well, the next one is the Sixth Trumpet War. Of course, there's the peace agreement as well. We don't know which one happens first. But the number one way to prepare yourself is to be ready to meet the Lord. I mean, we got to talk about these things. You say, Dave, come on, I don't want to talk about that. We got to talk about it. There's nothing more important than having your salvation set. You're born again. You've got your name in the Lamb's Book of Life. Then you can forget about the fear of death, and you just start working on your mission that God is giving you in the end time. So, I mean, that's things we have to talk about. I'm just being honest with you. We could, I could try to make it fluffy and feel good and things like that, but hey, we got to get down to where the rubber meets the road. What do we need to do in the near future? You got to be born again. You got to be saved. You got to make your salvation sure. You got to endure to the end. You got to live as a Christian. Get your name in the Lamb's Book of Life. And if any one of us, you understand, folks, a lot of people don't want to talk about death and things like that. The obituaries are full every day. So how do you prepare for that? You make sure that wherever you're going to spend eternity is set. You get that right. And then that takes the fear of death away. Now, obviously, yes, it's kind of I've never died before. So yeah, it's a new dimension. It's something to really think about, and I've got some hesitation just like everybody else. But if something happens to me tonight on my way home, I know where I'm waking up tomorrow. I'm going to be staring Jesus right in the face. And I'm going to give him a big hug and say, you know what? I love you. Thank you for dying on the cross and purchasing a plan of salvation for me. So that's the number one way to prepare. I'll do a program in the future. I got something else I got to go over, but I'll do a program in the future on preparing spiritually, mentally, and physically for the times just ahead and for eternity. I'll focus on that. But let me shift gears here on you. I want to talk about the world government right now. It's an ongoing fulfillment of Bible prophecy. So 650 years before John wrote the book of Revelation, Daniel was given a vision of 4 beasts that represented kingdoms or nations that would exist at the time of the second coming of Jesus Christ. The beast described in Daniel 7 verses 4 through 7, and the modern nations that they symbolize were a lion with eagle's wings, which is the Great Britain and the United States. I'm not going to take time to prove all this. We've done it many times, and I'll do it again in the future, but you just got to trust me. There was also a bear, which represents the modern nation of Russia, a 4-headed leopard, the modern nation of Germany, a 10-horned beast, the reborn Holy Roman Empire or the current European Union. Well, then you jump forward to the book of Revelation. John uses, you can read this, Daniel 7 and then the book of Revelation 13. In Revelation, John uses these exact same symbols of nations to describe the end-time world government. In John's account, there is the four separate nations of Daniel 7 have federalized into one large global governing body. This is Revelation 13. So the interpretation would go something like this. This would be Revelation 13, verses 1 and 2. John said, "And I stood upon the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rising up out of the sea, having 7 heads, 10 horns. Upon its horns, symbolizing the European Union, were 10 crowns. And upon his heads, the name of blasphemy. Then John said, and the beast, this federalized beast, which I saw, was like unto, it had the body of a leopard, Germany. Its feet were as the feet of the bear, Russia. Mouth is the mouth of the lion, Great Britain. And the dragon, or Satan, gave him his power, seat, and great authority." Again, that's Revelation 13, 1 through 2. So this is a 2,000-year-old prophecy of the world government that is currently being established. Okay? So, let me see, where do I want to start here? So let me go back to Strobe Talbot. So you remember who Strobe Talbot was. He was president of the Brookings Institution, part of the establishment from 2002 to 2017. He was the former Deputy Secretary of State under the Bill Clinton administration. Well, he stated it very clearly in his article. He was a globalist. Bill Clinton was a globalist. They believed in world government. Barack Obama was a globalist. The Bushes were a globalist. President Joe Biden is a globalist. They believe in world government to the nth degree. They're globalists. Well, Strobe Talbot stated in an article that he published back in Time magazine, 1992. It's like July 20, 1992. He wrote an article, "The Birth of the Global Nation." Not of the United States, Russia, China, Israel, no. The birth of the global nation. One global nation that would answer to a world governing body. That was his thinking. So in the article, he stated this. This is very important because I'm going to go into what President Biden is doing on our border, the southern border of the United States right now. Back in 1992, Strobe Talbot said, in the next century, nationhood, or a nation that would protect its borders, nationhood, as we know it, is going to be obsolete. Now, he's talking about the century we're living in. nationhood, the nation state, the different nation states around the world, that ideology is going to be obsolete, he says. And all states will recognize a single global authority or a world government. So this is the goal of every globalist. Everybody who, along with the United Nations, the removal of national borders. We don't need to protect our borders. Hey, it's not, we need to let everybody come in and offer them, we need to offer them a citizenship, amnesty. And so it's the removal of national borders and the creation of a single global community which answers to a world government. That's what's going on in the mind of a globalist. Moving on. And so what's going on right now? Well, I just listened to a speech by Texas Governor Greg Abbott. He was down on the border, and he's dealing with a globalist president, President Joe Biden, that believes in open borders. And his entire speech, he was in a helicopter. He flew over along the border. He saw the ICE, the place where they take people that have come in to check them in and things like that. Most of them are illegal. And they're trying to find out who they are, what are you doing here? I mean, it's like unbelievable. It's overwhelming. And it's overwhelming because of what President Biden is doing on our southern border. He just pretty much flung the border open. And so what's happened? Well, the Christian Post reported that Texas Governor Greg Abbott and the state's Department of Public Safety will deploy the Texas National Guard to the United States-Mexico border. Now, you understand it's the federal government's job to protect our borders. But since they're not doing it, Texas Governor Greg Abbott said, well, I've got to. So he's deploying the Texas National Guard to the United States-Mexico border as part of Operation Lone Star. Texas is the Lone Star state, so Operation Lone Star. And what he's trying to do is to prevent the Mexican cartels and the traffickers from smuggling people and drugs into the state of Texas. Because under the President Obama administration, they're not doing their job. So describing the situation as a border crisis, Governor Greg Abbott made the announcement on Twitter Saturday, and he said the operation involves the deployment of the Texas National Guard as well as air, ground, marine, tactical border security assets to deny Mexican cartel smugglers the ability to move drugs and people into Texas. Why is he doing that? What's this whole thing all about? It's about a globalist president who believes in a world government opening the borders on the southern border, the southern Texas.
Most of us walk around day by day blind to the prophecies being fulfilled right before us. Every news report brings a new piece to the puzzle in the race towards the final 7 years and the second coming of Jesus Christ. Now, more than ever, it is important for God's people to understand the times in which we are living. On November the 12th, 2013, we opened our Jerusalem Prophecy College in downtown Jerusalem. These same courses are now available online for people who are unable to attend the classes in person. We welcome students to join us and discover the link between current events and the prophecies of the Bible. Take your place in the prophecy of Daniel 11:33. Enroll in the Jerusalem Prophecy College today. Go to JerusalemProphecyCollege.com.
So, in a statement, Governor Greg Abbott was critical of the Joe Biden administration, President Biden administration, which has pledged to reverse the Trump administration's strict immigration policies that aim to thwart the smuggling and illegal immigration through the southern border. So Governor Abbott was quoted by the local news outlet Fox 14. And he stated that, and I'm quoting him, "The crisis at our southern border continues to escalate because of the Biden administration policies that refuse to secure the border and invite illegal immigration into the state of Texas." He said, and this is very critical, because remember what Strobe Talbot said, that, hey, the nation state's going to be obsolete. The world will answer, all this global nation will answer to a world governing body. Well, Texas, Governor Abbott said Texas supports legal immigration. We're all about immigration, but come in legally, but will not be an accomplice to the open border policies. That's very key, because the nation state protects its borders. You have no nation if you don't protect your borders. But because of what Strobe Talbot said back in '92 at Time Magazine and what President Biden is doing, they've opened the borders, and this is what Governor Abbott's talking about. He says these open border policies that cause, rather than prevent, a humanitarian crisis in our state and endanger the lives of Texans. He said, "We will surge the resources and law enforcement personnel needed to confront this crisis." Folks, this is part of the ongoing fulfillment of Bible prophecy of world government. Because President Biden is a globalist, this is he believes in, we don't protect our borders. And let's just fling them wide open. And that's what's happening today on the southern border of the United States. And Governor Abbott is saying, we're not going to have that. So we're going to put all the resources needed to stop that. I think in the speech, I listened to the speech, and he said that last year, I think there were, close to 100,000 apprehensions. Maybe it was less than that. I'm trying to remember. Don't quote me on this, but it was around 100,000, maybe a little less. He said this year already, in 2.5 months, we've had well over 100,000 apprehensions. And just people flooding across the border. And so, what are we talking about here? Strobe Talbot said there will come a time in the next century when the nation state's going to be considered obsolete, and everybody is going to answer to a global authority. Well, in talking about world government, I wanted to give you that for instance, because there's a lot of things. I could talk the rest of the day about it, but the Counterpunch organization, they published an article, "A Rapidly Globalizing World Needs Strengthened Global Governance." So here's the article. They said that the world is currently engulfed in crises. We're seeing one happen on our border right now, but they won't talk about that one. But they said most prominently a disease pandemic, a climate catastrophe, and the prevalence of war. While individual nations are encountering enormous difficulties in coping with them. They say that these difficulties result from the global nature of the problems. And an individual nation, and listen at listen at how this thing is phrased, this article is phrased down through here. They're talking about, well, the nation state is kind of obsolete because it's not able to cope with these things. So really what we need is a world government. That's the entire article. So listen closely. They say an individual nation is unable to institute adequate measures to safeguard public health because diseases spread easily across national boundaries. So instead of what they should do is nations work together, they're saying, no, it's just becoming obsolete. They said similarly, an individual nation cannot stave off deterioration of the climate because the climate is a worldwide phenomenon. Even though it's all propaganda, this human-induced global warming which leads to climate change, that the United Nations keeps just pushing at. What they're doing is they're pushing world government. Because their answer to all of this is more government, right? That's always the answer. More government, more restriction, cap and trade legislation. I mean, just one thing after another. Furthermore, an individual nation cannot prevent warfare, including the drift to a disastrous nuclear war, because nations live in a state approaching international anarchy with each other, relying on its own military strength to safeguard what it views as its national interests. So the international community doesn't like that. They do not like a state protecting its own national interest. They want to do what Europe has done, and all the states yield up their sovereignty to a central governing system, which is in Brussels, Belgium, the parliament. That's what the European project is all about. Well, they want all the nations of the world to do that. The European Union, that's the model for world government in the earth. So they go on to say that, of course, the need for concerted global action, okay, to address global crisis has long been recognized. At the end of World War II, when the most destructive conflict in world history demonstrated, here it is, the limits of the nation-state system, they're all preaching the same thing as Strobe Talbot. The nation-state's obsolete. We need to move into a system of world government. They say that the world leaders created the United Nations to take on the new tasks, particularly the task of fostering international security. Everybody look to the world government for your security. And to some extent, the United Nations has been successful in dealing with international problems, even though there's been conflict ever since. But over the decades, since the founding of the United Nations, it has become obvious that the world organization is too weak and underfunded to meet all the challenges of our rapidly globalizing world. And then they say, here it comes again, given the increasingly dysfunctional nature of individual nations on the world stage, so they're just hammering the nation state. They do not want that. They're saying you guys aren't capable of handling your own problems. If you get into a conflict with another nation, you go to war. Climate change, the COVID-19 pandemic, all these different things, that the individual state is dysfunctional, individual nations on the world stage. And isn't it time, they say in the article, isn't it time to consider strengthening global governance, world government? And as most people feel attached to local regions and individual nations, the ideal form of enhanced government for the planet would probably be federal, a federal government, a world government. In the United States, this would mean building on the current federal system of local, state, national government with a layer of governance at the global level. That's what they want. They're advocating world government. The nation state, that doesn't work. We want a world government. This is what President Biden believes. That's why we're dealing with the border crisis, because he's flung the borders wide open, and now we've got a huge border crisis that he won't deal with. Governor Abbott's got to deal with that. It's all about, it goes back to a 2,000-year-old prophecy that John prophesied about world government. That's what's going on our southern border of our state right now. And this additional layer already exists to a modest degree, the article says, in the form of the United Nations and international law. World government. The article's telling you exactly what the United Nations is. But it merely requires strengthening to make it more effective. We want to have teeth. We want to have enforcement methods. So the idea of creating a global authority to tackle world affairs is not a new one. It was promoted for centuries by prominent writers and thinkers. Dante Alighieri, Immanuel Kant, H.G. Wells, Albert Einstein. After the vast carnage of World War II and the atomic bombing of Japan convinced many people that creating a global federation of nations was imperative, it inspired a mass movement by the world. By mid-1949, the United World Federalists, the American branch of the World Federalist Movement, had nearly 50,000 members and 720 chapters. In the fall of 1949, as part of this remarkable organization, 111 members of the U.S. House of Representatives, 21 members of the U.S. Senate, co-sponsored a congressional resolution declaring that the United Nations should be developed into a world federation open to all nations. The co-sponsors included John F. Kennedy, Gerald Ford, Hubert Humphrey, Mike Mansfield, Christian Herder, Jacob Javits, Paul Douglas, and other individuals who became influential figures in American public life. Over subsequent decades, though, the World Federalist Movement ebbed, while nations, especially the, I think the World Federalist Movement, what's it called now? The something for global solutions or something like that. But they said, while nations, especially the great, they just changed their name. They're not gone, they just changed their name. But while nations, especially the great powers, largely followed their parochial interest, a process that frequently sets them at odds with one another, meanwhile, the United Nations stumbled along as a principled voice of international cooperation and international law, but a weak instrument for enforcing them, a situation that we can only see too well today. So what they want here, folks, what they're talking about is they want a system of enforceable world law. I've heard, what was his name? Walter Cronkite, who was a member of the World Federalist Association. He received the Norman Cousins Award for his efforts towards pushing for a world government. He said we need a system of enforceable world law. They don't like it to where the United Nations can just suggest things. They want it enforcement methods. That's what they want, dictatorial. So even so, the article says, even so there remains organizations like the World Federalist Movement that promote governance, as well as startlingly large numbers of people who seem ready for it. Get this. Listen to this very closely. A Pew Research Center poll across during the summer of 2020 found that 81% of respondents believed that countries around the world should act as part of a global community that works together to solve problems. Only 17% disagreed. I totally disagree. I don't want the United States part of a world governing system. And they said in the midst of multiple crises that beset today's world, the gathering obsolescence of the nation, here it is again, in addressing global issues suggests the need to take another look at strengthening global governance and what it might accomplish. So they're saying they took a poll of 14 different nations and over 80% of the people were comfortable with a world government. So the Bible says that just prior to the second coming of Jesus Christ, there will be a world government established. Most of the world, the Bible says everyone whose name is not written in the Lamb's Book of Life will worship that entity and follow after it. So I wanted to come before you today because that's something you absolutely cannot do. Never pledge allegiance to the Antichrist or his world governing system. It's all prophesied that it's going to happen, and we're watching it happening right now. What's going on our southern border of Texas, that's what Governor Greg Abbott's dealing with, the open border policies of a globalist president. It's all prophesied in the Bible 2,000 years ago, Revelation chapter 13.
This has been End of the Age, brought to you by the faithful partners of Endtime Ministries. If you're not currently a partner with Endtime Ministries, or if you would like more information, we invite you to call us at 1-800-ENDTIME. That's 1-800-363-8463, or visit us online at endtime.com.
Thank you for watching. If you liked this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel and like our Facebook page.